Advisor 3.0 is back. Financial planners, are you ready? One day, over 20 game-changing sessions. On May the 15th, 2025, London is the place to be if you want to shake up your skills and network with the very best. Oh, did I not mention? Astronaut Tim Peake is a headline speaker. Yeah, that Tim Peake. So get your tickets now at advisor3.0.co. Don't just stay in the game, lead it.
This is Advisor 3.0, a show designed to help you as a financial advisor elevate your professional practice, transform your clients' lives, and take your business to the next level. I am Abraham Okusoya. Welcome to the show. True wealth is not about finish lines or numbers. It's about using whatever material abundance we have to enrich the other, more enduring paths to fulfillment. However, if we relentlessly chase wealth as an end unto itself, at the expense of other facets of well-being, history and science both teach us that it will lead to a hollowing out of life and an impoverishment of spirit. That's according to my guest, who has spent his entire career at the intersection of money, mind, and meaning. Dr. Daniel Crosby is the author of a new book, The Soul of Wealth, 50 Reflections of Money and Meaning. Dr. Crosby, welcome to the show.
Abraham, it's good to be with you, man.
As I was saying to you before we went live, the book, Soul of Wealth, really fascinating, packed with nuggets of wisdom. I don't believe that, I underline books, I destroy books, physical books when I read them, but I don't believe that there's any other book in recent times that I have underlined as much as I have done this, my friend. This is a treasure trove of wisdom.
Well, you are too kind. That is the greatest compliment an author can receive is to see a book that's been bloodied and bruised with note taking. So I'm so glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you for the work you put in, and I was privileged to listen to a presentation by you last year, Fearless Conference in the US, where you talked about the book, I have been aware, followed your work in this space. Many of our listeners would be familiar with you and your work. I know you've been to the UK and spoke at conferences in the UK, but for those who have been living under the rock for perhaps a while, tell us a little bit, give us a sense of your journey. How does a trained clinical psychologist end up at the intersection of money, mind, and meaning?
Yeah, it's a great question. So as you suggested, I am a shrink by education. I went to school to become a psychotherapist, and about 3 years into my doctoral training, I just frankly burned out. I was 23 when I started doing therapy, which I'm not sure anyone should listen to what a 23-year-old has to say about how to live their life. But, we'll ignore that for a moment. But I just, it was just stressful work for me. I was meeting 40 or 50 hours a week with people who are just in crisis, having the hardest, the worst time of their life in many cases. And I was young, I had poor boundaries, and I was taking work home with me. And so I went to my father, who is a financial advisor to this day, is still a financial advisor. And I said to him, we're very close. And I said, Dad, I love being a student of human behavior. I love studying the mind. I love studying behavior and why people do the things that they do. But I don't think I want to do it in a medical context. And he said, well, son, there's a ton of psychology in my work. Now, Abraham, I had never thought of my dad's work as having any psychology in it. I understood my dad to be first and foremost a stock picker, and then secondarily a salesman. Like that's what he did. He gathered assets and he picked stocks in my mind. And he sort of opened my mind to this world of human first advice, even though he wouldn't have had that language certainly at the time. But through that comment, and again, this is 15, 16, 17 years ago, my dad didn't know what behavioral finance was. My dad didn't know what behavioral economics was. But his mention of the work of a financial advisor having a deep psychological component is what set me on a path to eventually discover, the work of many of the greats that we know, and then try and make that my own career.
It's fascinating how financial advice somehow, I don't know, I mean, there may well be other professions who somehow have, maybe lawyers draw their kids, towards this profession. I there's probably some truth in that. But financial advice, I find somehow has a way of drawing children, family members, sometimes spouses into the profession. I don't know, why is this? Do you have any theory?
Yeah, I have thoughts. I mean, we're very lucky because when you think about other fields, there's not many fields where you can make this good of a living and have this large of an impact. Right. I mean, there's other fields like being a psychologist. You can certainly make a big impact, but you can't make the living that a financial advisor can make. And that, there's lots of other fields like that. So in terms of, the crossroads of remuneration and impact, I don't know that there's a better job in the world than being a financial advisor.
I couldn't agree more with that. So let's talk about the book, Soul of Wealth. So this will be your fifth book. Mm-hmm. I remember Personal Benchmark was one of your books. But anyway, this book, I mean, the fifth, doing it the fifth time. I've written one book, Daniel, and I said to myself, I swore, I wouldn't do another one. Now, that was a few years ago, and maybe I've changed my mind a little bit. I'm contemplating it. But the fifth one, what is it that led you to this particular book? How is it different than the previous ones that you've done?
So, Abraham, my having written 5 books and your having written one only shows people how stupid and irrational I am, because it's the only reason anyone would ever do something this hard that makes so little money. But one of the things, I'm a big believer that it had been 6 years since I had written a book. Right. And I feel like you shouldn't write a book until you just can't help it anymore. And I had arrived at that point with the ideas that now comprise the Soul of Wealth. I had seen that, in the words of Viktor Frankl, ever more today, people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. This is the richest, most abundant moment in human history. And we have, that reality juxtaposed with a very real mental health crisis, an epidemic of loneliness. Now, the UK sort of famously appointed a minister of loneliness because loneliness has become such a huge problem in the Western world. And so trying to make sense of that and do something to bridge that divide became an all-encompassing fire within me, that I saw that we had all this material wealth and seemingly no idea how to save, spend, or invest it in ways that made us happy.
Yeah, and so much so that there is a chapter in the book where you said, your money needs a why. Why does my money need a why?
Yeah, your money needs a why. The research on this is so powerful that it's almost feels like science fiction. It's so good when we begin to tie money with meaning. So a few bits of research, Morningstar found that people who named their accounts, this is, instead of Abraham account 123 XYZ, this is the Abraham retired to Switzerland account. I don't know where you want to retire, but it just putting that purpose on it. People who named their accounts had 15% more wealth than people who had not named their accounts. An SEI study found that people were 10 times less likely to go to cash when their accounts were tied to a purpose. So during the great financial crisis, 10 times less likely to go to cash. And then my favorite study, this was a 2009 study out of Canada, showed that when people looked at a picture of their children for a few seconds before they made a financial decision, they made better decisions, they saved twice as much money, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all about mooring back, connecting back that money to that meaning. Because a lot of times we treat our investments sort of like a video game. It's just these numbers that go up and down, sort of disconnected from the things that they can buy and the life that they serve. And so the simple act of reconnecting that money and that meaning powerfully increases our behavior and our savoring and our enjoyment of the entire investment journey.
This insight around money, meaning, all of this, you might call it soft aspect of a financial advisor's job, are just becoming bigger and bigger. So much so that you can go through the CFP program and learn about numbers and cash flow and investments and all that stuff. But then you realize, as you did, when you had the conversation with your dad, that actually a lot of this is less about the numbers and more about all this other stuff. How, in your mind, has the role of a financial advisor changed, or how is it changing to be able to, or how does it need to change to be able to adequately serve this insight that you talked about in the book?
So I think you're exactly right, but I think sometimes we do a disservice. I don't know a better name for soft skills, right? We talk about soft skills, but soft skills have hard impact. And in 2016, Merrill Lynch did a meta-analysis, so a study of all the studies on the ways that advisors add value to their clients' lives. And the good news is that every single thing an advisor does is additive. Everything from asset allocation to planning to tax alpha, like all that stuff is additive. But the elements that were the most additive were what we would call soft skills. Behavioral coaching, keeping people keeping people from letting their emotional reactions override their plan. That was worth 8 times as much as asset allocation, right? Which we would think about asset allocation as a hard skill and behavioral coaching as a soft skill, but the soft skill has the harder impact. And you even look at things like client assessment, like just getting to know a client's personality, getting to know them and know who they are, visualization. All of these things that I talk about in The Soul of Wealth that are, ostensibly soft skills actually move the value needle more than what we would consider the very meat and potatoes fundamentals of planning and tax and asset allocation. So I think my first soapbox to be on is we shouldn't confuse soft skills with soft impact, because that is simply not the case. In terms of what the advisor of the future will look like, you cannot have that conversation without talking about AI. And I think you have to look at what AI does well. And what AI does better than humankind is analytics, calculations, rote stuff, memorization, right? What AI doesn't do well is creativity, art, comforting, sales. So I think the advisor of the future, I think that all the stuff we talked about before, tax, planning, asset management, that will become further and further commoditized because AI is going to become very, very good at that, right? That will leave us, though, the good news is that will leave us to be more and more human. That will leave us more time, more opportunity to do the things with our clients that add the greatest value. Oh, yeah. And are the stickiest and the most enjoyable, right? So I am so enthusiastic about the future of advice. There's a white paper called Wealth Management 2030, and now when it came out, 2030 was a long way out. Now it's like right around the corner. But in this white paper, they basically say advisors will become more and more like life coaches because money touches every part of our clients' lives. And so we should be in every part of that conversation, including their relationships, their wellness, their health, their well-being. And I see that is where it's headed, and I'm super excited about it.
I mean, your comment reminds me of about AI reminds me of a quote or comment by a lady called Joanna Majeska. And basically she says something along the lines of, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AI to do art and writing so I can do laundry and dishes. And I think it's really about that, right? There's also, this talk about AI coming into financial planning and doing stuff. As a matter of fact, we should embrace that, all of the boring stuff, portfolio reporting, analysis, cash flow projections, all these things. It's fine for AI to do all that stuff. As a matter of fact, we should welcome that stuff. What that enables, as you said, is it frees up space to do all this soft stuff with hard impact, right?
Yeah, I think we should welcome our robot overlords, Abraham. Because I think if you think about how well positioned we are as financial advisors versus someone like a graphic designer or even a filmmaker or, God forbid, a copywriter, AI is getting very good at those things, very good. Right. And so I think a lot of people in traditional right brain sort of creative pursuits are going to have a hard time in the future. And that is too bad, because I respect and admire those professions. But if you think about our work, which is a mix of what you might call, analytical and relational work, a good mix, maybe even a 50-50-ish mix, the laundry, right? The laundry and the dishes of being a financial advisor will very quickly be made obsolete by AI. It will. It's just better at that stuff than we are. It's quicker, it's cheaper, it's more reliable. And so the worst parts, again, I'm a shrink, so I like what I like. But from my perspective, the laundry and the dishes of being a financial advisor will soon be automated. And alongside that, it won't be a good place for you to compete. The place for you to compete will be on the relational part, the value add part, the human part. We're going to be increasingly freed up for that. So where I think a lot of professionals have a profound need to worry, I think our lives only get better, and we only get freed up to do more of what we ought to be doing and where we add the most value in the first place.
Okay, what have we got? 700 advisors, 20 sessions. May the 15th, 2025 at London. After party, very important. What am I missing? You! Yeah, you! Listening to this. Advisor 3.0 tickets are selling very, very fast. Be sure you get yours, you don't want to miss out. All information can be found out at advisor3.0.co. See you there.
What should we be doing then as advisors to prepare for this world? Should we do what Daniel did, which is go and get a PhD in clinical psychology? How much of our education, should now be focused on this human aspect of financial planning? Not soft, that's the wrong term. Human aspect of financial planning.
I mean, listen, they say to never ask a barber if you need a haircut, right? So I mean, you're effectively asking a psychologist if we should study human behavior. I'm going to tell you yes. I think again, we're not there yet, but we are going to get to a place where things like investment management and even financial planning, I think for a long time, investment management has been commodified for some time. But if you look at financial planning, I think a lot of advisors have hung their hat on that as a sort of a differentiator. And it's important. I don't mean to say that it's not important. It is. But AI will become very good at financial planning. It will. And so I think increasingly we will need to be on the human side of things. And if you look again, sorry for the US centric stats here. I am who I am and I live where I live. But 40% of Americans receive financial advice, but only about half, slightly less than half of them follow that advice. And this is consistent with, medical interventions. This is consistent with diet and exercise. We see that in all these human endeavors, it's not just about getting good advice. Like, we need to raise the number of people who receive advice in the first place, of course, but we also need to raise the level of people who are receiving advice and actually sticking with it. So we have a ton of work to do as an industry to just make sure that even the people who are working with an advisor are taking the advice that they're given. And you don't get that by learning about the difference between a stock and a bond, right? You learn that by learning how to deal with humans and how to be persuasive. So I think increasingly, a couple of years ago when they added the financial psychology to the CFP curriculum, that was sort of the shot heard around the world. This was this huge event. That part's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I think we can count on that.
One of the things that came out strongly in your book, and indeed in your talk back that I listened to last year, was this thing about advisors helping clients to get what money can buy, which is meaning. Right. So, I was listening to a conversation, I think an audiobook earlier, and he was saying, well, what is it that money can't buy? Well, meaning. Money can't buy meaning. And you spend a lot of, time in the book talking about meaning and using our wealth, giving our wealth a purpose. How I'm just trying to imagine, is there anything from the research and indeed from the book that you can give to advisors when they are sitting and having conversation with clients to help get to their client's purpose and give them a sense of meaning?
Yeah. So, Abraham, we're going to do something here on your podcast. We're going to give people the meaning of life. Okay. So I have given this a lot of thought, too much, some would say. And I've really dug into the research on meaning because I see this as probably the most transformative thing that people can arrive at. And what I have arrived at is that there's 3 B's, and this is all based on the research. If you want to live a life of purpose, there's 3 B's that you need. The first B is believing. So people who describe their lives as meaningful have a moral code. This could be religion. This could be spirituality. This could be stoicism or philosophy. This could be your own sort of moral code that you've arrived at through years of living and thoughtfulness. But you need some playbook for making sense of this insanity that we call life. That is important, right? That you have some sort of mental lattice work or some sort of framework for understanding life. So you need to know what you believe. The second one is the most important. That is belonging, right? You need to matter to someone. You need to give love. You need to receive love. This is consistently the best predictor of a happy, joyful, purposeful life is the quality of your relationships, right? You need to matter to someone. And then the last one is becoming. You need a clear vision of the person you want to become and the path you want your life to take. So if you think about those things, what do I believe? Who do I love? Who do I want to become? If you can answer those three questions, you're on your way. And I think all of us are at different paths at different, I think it sort of ebbs and flows in all of our lives, how well we're doing on each of those three areas. But if you can get those three things sorted, believing, belonging, and becoming, that's the whole ball game.
Powerful stuff. Wow. Another theme in the book I want to pick out is you talked about comparison as the thief of joy. And the term that I don't know if the term that came to my mind as I was reading this is wealth gap aversion, right? You talk about risk aversion, but then I was reading and I thought, wealth gap aversion. And this is this idea that this is your word that you said, the emotional distress caused by comparing ourselves to wealthier individuals sort of outweighs the satisfaction we might feel when we compare ourselves to those who are less wealthy than us. Can you speak to that? Why? Why is it that we derive so much pain and stress when we compare ourselves to other people?
One of the things that humankind is wired for, and if you look at any behavioral bias, right, it's typically about how we're wired, and there's almost always a good reason why we're wired that way. One of the things that we're wired for is fairness. You even see this in monkeys. Right. You even see this in monkeys. Monkeys really like grapes. Right. And so if you've got two monkeys in clear cages next to each other and you give a monkey a piece of lettuce and you give another monkey a piece of lettuce, they're like, oh, cool. Right. You give the one monkey a piece of lettuce and you give the other monkey a couple of grapes. The lettuce monkey will lose its mind because the other monkey got something better, right? We are wired for fairness, and that does a lot of good. I think it's the reason why, I think our court systems and our laws and our justice system are predicated on this idea that people should be dealt with fairly. So it's a net win for humankind to be wired for fairness. But when you think about how we benchmark our lives, the term I use in the book, the term in the literature is being selective about your reference classes. For people in developed countries, right, who have a modest level of wealth, most people in developed countries are doing okay. So, they have the basics of life covered. And so wealth becomes a relative consideration, right? It becomes, who's got a nicer handbag or who's got a nicer car. And so the reference class we choose becomes profoundly important because it's not about if we have enough, because you just do. You have enough. You have enough to eat. You have a warm, assuming you have enough food, enough water, a warm place to lay your head at night, like you're kind of good. And so after that, it becomes a measure of fairness, and it becomes a measure of choosing our reference class intentionally. And Abraham, the thing that's so tricky is our brains are like, depending who you ask, 150 to 200,000 years old. But we're living in this modern world that we're really not wired for, because for most of human history, you knew like 100 people, right? You know what I mean? Like for most of human history, you lived in your little town or your little village or your little tribe, and you just kind of knew, you know, the research shows you can know about 150 people and know them well. Well, now, you know, and the odds are the people in your tribe, the people in your village, the people in your town, their lives probably looked a lot like yours financially. There was not a lot of gradation between those levels of wealth. Now, I can follow Messi on Instagram and see that man has a much nicer car than me, right?
Yeah.
You know, I can follow, the Kardashians or whoever and see that they have better abs than me. Anyway, we no longer live in these small tribes and villages where we just know 100 people who are kind of like us. We can now benchmark our lives to the richest, best looking people on earth. And it leaves us pretty sad. So if we're not thoughtful about our reference class, things get dicey, things get tough, and we have a profound sense of unfairness that harms us psychologically.
Do you have any sort of tips in terms of how to constantly come back to or choose this reference point? So I'm thinking, you know, for instance, as clients of financial advisors are probably in the first or second decile of wealth in the nation, you know, so therefore, would you encourage comparison against the overall population because we know they're better off? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I really do. I have quite a personal thought on this.
Please.
So I'm from Alabama, which will not be familiar perhaps to UK listeners, but let's just say if it's not the poorest of the 50 states, it's awfully close. Like it's going to be 48 or 49 in terms of wealth out of 50. And so the town I grew up in was nice, but solidly middle class, right? Solidly middle class. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia, a much bigger, much flashier place to live. And when I moved from Alabama to Atlanta, and I had business reasons for doing that, mostly around being closer to a big airport. When I moved from Alabama to Atlanta, I moved from a relatively modest home to a much larger home. Now, my home is not the largest home in my neighborhood by any measure, but now I live by people who have incredible wealth. And it makes me sad. Like it feels unfair. My neighbor has 2 Ferraris. I don't, but my neighbor has 2 Ferraris, and I didn't have to see that before. And now I do. And I'll tell you, I was happier before. His Ferraris were always there, but they weren't in my face. Right? So I think being thoughtful about the people you surround yourselves with, the places you put yourself in, and the company you keep is really a profound thing. Beyond that, we know that social media is damaging to our mental health. I mean, I don't know any more polite way to put it, but limiting time on social media has a similar impact to taking antidepressant medication. So again, this has a lot to do with reference class optimization, because all social media is a highlight reel of other people's lives. Social media is other people putting their most edited, most cropped, most curated, best foot forward, even as you are aware of every wart and zit and, time your spouse yelled at you. So what happens is we compare the frame by frame of our lives to only the best frames of other people's lives, and it leaves us worse off. So in real life, be thoughtful of where you stand and who you surround yourself with, and in online, be equally thoughtful about who you follow and how much you dig in there.
Yeah, I like that. And I like one thing you said in the book, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. No, really powerful stuff. I'd always thought about this, and especially if, for our own finances, and when we think about where we're going to live and all that stuff, I always feel that we should live in areas that we are fairly sure that we have more income or wealth than most people in that area, because I thought that we will almost always feel better about ourselves. I don't know if this is true, by the way, but yeah.
Yeah.
The other another theme, as we start to wrap this up, I've enjoyed this conversation. Was this issue, this eternal question about money buying happiness. You get, and one that you address in the book, which is, we've always been told money doesn't buy happiness, or money doesn't make you happy, but everybody wants to drive for themselves. So I guess this is the question. This is the time. Tell us, Dr. Crosby, Reverend Dr. Crosby, we'll come back to that, which is, can money make you happy?
Sort of. So let's dig into the research a little bit. So there's no blood test for happiness, obviously. So part of it is a definitional issue of how do you define happiness. And some definitions of happiness are relatively simple, and I would even say animalistic. They would be sort of like an absence of need or an absence of desire. So like, if you're hungry, do you have enough to eat? If you're thirsty, do you have enough to drink? And there's no doubt that money buys that sort of happiness. Money will absolutely buy you the absence of want. And, Daniel Kahneman and Kahneman and Deaton a few years ago did this study that got a ton of press. It was the fact that happiness rose dramatically up into about $75,000 per year, and then it nearly flatlined. That would be about $100,000 US today. So, happiness rises up to about 100,000, and then it kind of flatlines. And then, people were sort of shouting from the rooftops, well, see, money doesn't buy happiness. Not so fast, because the way they did it was they gave people pagers, like beepers, and they would beep them throughout the day and say, hey, how you doing? Well, what money does is, if you're sick, you can go to the doctor. If you're hungry, you can eat. You can live in a safe home. You're not hearing gunshots at night. All that stuff. Like that brings about a certain kind of happiness, and that's real. But what they found since then is that if you define happiness more subjectively, if I just say, Abraham, how you doing? Write me a paragraph about how you're doing. How is your life? And it's more of a subjective or a qualitative measurement. Money rises with happiness up to $500,000 a year in income, which is where they stopped measuring it, because that's a 1% income. And so basically money did buy self-appraised happiness basically forever. And so what we know now is a couple of things for sure. Money definitely buys the absence of misery. Full stop, right? Like if you don't have enough money, you're going to be unhappy. We know that. Past a certain point, though, it becomes more about who you are, how you spend it, and what you do with it. Because what the research has found is that for 15% of people, money has no impact on happiness. It could be some sort of organic mental illness. It could be just sort of the what's going on in their life. It could be these other things, and money just doesn't matter for like 15% of the population. But for a lot of people, it does. And for about a third of people, happiness actually accelerates past that $100,000 mark, because that's when you get away like, okay, now you've covered the basics. Now life starts to get good, right? Like now I can start to focus on meaning and purpose and my hobbies and things like that. So it matters how you spend it. The absence of money brings misery. And if you have bigger problems, whether it's, mental health considerations or other things in your life that are just not going right, wherever you go, there you are. And you have to figure those things out in order for money to be able to buy you any happiness at all.
Wow. So your book, Soul of Wealth, is hugely recommended for anyone, frankly, and especially those of us in the business of money, right? Financial advisors, investment managers, that sort of thing. So I highly recommend it. I've just been talking to you about getting some copies, and so we can. I'd love to give some. But beyond that, right? So to all listeners, of course, the advice is go get a copy, right? But beyond that, in all of this research that you've done, looking at history, looking at evidence and data, if there is one piece of advice that you can give to financial advisors, those who are in the business of helping other people get the most out of their money and out of their lives, what would it be?
It all comes back to relationships for me. I think that's what the data points to more than anything. And money can help with relationships, but there's also some half-truths around money and relationships, right? Money can buy you chocolate and flowers, but it can't buy you love, right? Money can buy you a trip with your kids, but it can't, mend your relationship with your kids. So I think that anything we can do to spend money, to spend time with people we love, to deepen relationships, to improve relationships, that to me is the highest and best use of money in just about every instance. And
where can we find more about you, about your work? I listen to your podcast, just for our audience, just where can we find more about your work?
Yeah, so the book is called The Soul of Wealth. I hope you love it as much as Abraham did. Very kind of you, sir. I have a podcast that is over 300 episodes deep now. It's called Standard Deviations. And I'm most active on LinkedIn these days. So Daniel Crosby, PhD. I'd love for you to follow along there.
Dr. Crosby, thank you for your time. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for the incredible, meaningful contribution that you've made, to how financial advisors work and frankly, how we think about money. Thank you.
My pleasure, Abraham. You've been so kind. Thank you.
That's a wrap on today's show. Massive thanks to my production crew, especially Jake Osha, Melissa Canham, and the entire team. And of course, to our sponsor, Timeline, the market leading provider of integrated planning technology and model portfolio service to advisors. I do hope you've enjoyed today's show. Head over to Apple Podcast and give us your review there. Until next time, goodbye.
Advisor 3.0 is back. Financial planners, are you ready? One day, over 20 game-changing sessions. On May the 15th, 2025, London is the place to be if you want to shake up your skills and network with the very best. Oh, did I not mention? Astronaut Tim Peake is a headline speaker. Yeah, that Tim Peake. So get your tickets now at advisor3.0.co. Don't just stay in the game, lead it.